Hello everyone and welcome to Brickcats. My channel is for anyone who enjoys custom LEGO creations, likes saving money, and or those looking to get into custom building. If you're a fan of my channel or are interested in supporting what I do, please consider liking this review, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Each like, subscription, and comment helps others find my channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Today I am reviewing Jenkins Republic Gunship, a model that created quite a buzz in the community when it released in October 2023. Without any substitutions in mid-February 2024, the parts for this model would come to me from 9 Bricklink stores with a total price of about $403 without shipping and tax, or roughly $485 with 7% sales tax and $6 shipping and handling per order. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, parts that you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume you've bought the instructions or are interested in buying them. I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Bricklink's ordering system and LEGO nomenclature. I only use genuine LEGO bricks and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. The ship measures roughly 15.5 inches front to back without including the length of the cannons, 18 inches wingtip to wingtip, and sits about 10.5 inches off my table on the included display stand. Off the stand, the ship is about 7 inches tall, and the cannons add 3 inches of length for a total of 18.5 inches. Starting right up front, the nose section looks really great, with lime detailing around the cannons, the center section represented with these black grill tiles, and a white rucksack piece to get what the Complete Vehicles guide identifies as a clamp for the crew module, which also apparently functions as an escape pod. I especially like how there is a little bit of white showing under the green here, and this kind of meticulous attention to detail is everywhere in this model. Moving to the front of the fuselage, most of the angles come together pretty much perfectly. There is a small gap right here that I am pretty sure can't be closed up to match exactly, but I do think mine is a little larger than it should be. The bright light orange highlights look great, although I think typically there's usually another orange section nearer to the gunner seat. I really like the inclusion of this light bluish gray section here. Depending on what you're using as a reference, this gray section should extend past this entranceway, but that would be extremely difficult if not impossible with the current piece inventory. The ball turrets use the 6x6 hemisphere piece, and this was a really impressive subassembly once it was all finished, and I really love the extra detailing with this wheel and the horse bridle for the cabling. These cannons have a good range of motion. They can move-ish like this, and you can also tilt it up and down, and we'll do it right now, but they rotate fairly easily. Technically, I think these are supposed to be the same size as the wingtip cannons, so either these are too big or the wing cannons are too small. It's kind of difficult to tell from the visuals, and I wasn't able to find any sources on the measurements for these, but they are big enough to fit a minifigure, and that's good enough for me. Focusing in on the cockpit, there is ample room for a pilot and a gunner minifigure. Like the ball turrets, I didn't put one in here to show you because you need to put the figures in during the build process, and once they're in there, they aren't going to be easy to get out, so you just have to take my word for it. Shaping of this section is very good, and most of the gaps on the gunner station are filled in with these trans clear pieces. The spine of the gunship gradually widens from approximately 4.5 studs at the front to 7 studs in between the missile launchers. There's nice color detailing with the tan and light bluish gray to give the model a bit of asymmetry. The Republic insignia, or as the Essential Guide calls it, the venerable emblem of Galactic Republic unity, uses a road sign piece and a clever connection to get it right up against the fuselage. The troop bay is wide open with the netting and bars across the top for handholds. The way these hoses are secured was one of my favorite parts of the build for whatever reason. It's very simple but also very satisfying, and importantly it looks accurate as well. As you can see, there is a lot of room here for clones, but only a few studs to pose them on. The construction of the floor doesn't allow for more, so if you want to pose more figures in here, you're going to want to use a larger plate. Proportionally, the troop bay looks just about perfect to me, with the minifigures approximately 60% of the bay's height. This little control panel looks a little too large for me, but certainly not a huge deal there. And looking at the forward part of the troop bay, there is even a slightly recessed representation of the door to the crew stations in the front there. The troop bay doors open and close reasonably well, but they can extend fairly far away from the centerline if you want to, like so. And the motion is pretty smooth, although I have had some issues where you can maybe kind of see a little bit of separation on the Technic piece there. Interesting, and the connection mechanism allows for some dynamic posing. Around the back, the rear ramp does open and close if you want it to. There is a decent amount of friction in this connection, and in my opinion this is just fine, as you generally want that ramp to be secure instead of floppy. The only issue here is that there's not really anything to grab onto, like a modified plate with the rail sometimes is used, so it's a little difficult to get to open unless you leave a little bit of a gap there to be able to push down on it. The rear turret is included and also has a range of motion if you want to pose it. The rear vents are built with skis, and there's some small grooveling sections underneath them as well. The missiles and the missile launchers are represented very well. I like this lime green section on the top with a little cutout, and of course everybody was very excited, rightfully so, about using the oars to create the long cones of the launchers themselves. I did note that the photos on Rebrickable have G-slips on these studs to either side of the missile rack, but these are not called for in the instructions. This would make this section look a little closer to what we see in Attack of the Clones. The wings are also crammed with details from the lime highlights on either side of the wingtip cannons, and the incredible shaping of the dark red color scheme. These slope sections have the little vent in front outlined with a thin strip of white, which is another one of those little details that I think is just incredibly well done. I only have two very small issues with the wings. This little step right at the end here, I wish this could have met up with the surface of the wing a little bit better. And secondly, there's also a fairly noticeable gap between the slope section and the missile launchers that I wish could have been filled in a little bit better. This gap is large enough to stick a 1x6 tile in there to fill it in if you want to. There is a separate parts list and instruction set for the stand, and in my opinion you should definitely build the stand. It's very simple and very sturdy, and it holds the gunship at a nice forward tilting angle. Overall, this gunship looks incredible. It's nearly completely studless and has incredible proportions and detailing, some of which I don't think have been represented as well in any other minifigure scale gunship model to date. The current version of Thomas Jenkins Gunship, which is version 4, released in mid-January 2024 and requires 466 elements and 3,232 pieces. Version 4 has a number of color changes for the internal elements to common colors like dark bluish gray or light bluish gray. I think this is generally fine, as these will typically be colors you will use if you plan to recycle this into other builds, but at the same time I like to be able to tell what I can pull from my existing inventory, and usually that's indicated with a piece marked in some crazy color like bright yellow or green or something like that, a very non-typical Star Wars color. If you did collect pieces based off an earlier wanted list like I did, you should likely use version 3 of the instructions, which are also posted on Rebrickable. That's the version with the colored pieces internal to the ship. Right off the bat, you should change the color of the brick modified 1x1 with studs on two sides opposite, part 47905 specified in blue, and the Technic lift arm thin 1x5 specified in medium lavender. These are placeholder colors and the pieces are hidden. I would change the modified brick to light bluish gray, bringing the total of these to 8, and change the Technic lift arm to the very common light bluish gray. The following largish Technic lift arms are mostly hidden in the top of the fuselage here, and unsurprisingly form the central core of the gunship. Any neutral color will work fine here. The parts list calls for the sticker sheet for the Clone Walker Battle Pack set 8014, and that's part 8014 STK01. If you can find the sticker sheet, that's great, but in my experience this costs several dollars. What I did was buy 2 stickered tiles and transfer the stickers over. You can use any of the 2x2 stickered tiles, but the most available seems to be part 4150PB002B in light bluish gray or white, which came in 6 sets. I typically use a razor blade to lift the stickers off the pieces. They should stick just fine to the new ones. Be careful with the razor blade, obviously. The Technic lift arm thin 1x5 in white, part 32017, is very rare in this color. Sadly, these are quite visible at the bottom of the rear ramp. The least bad alternative, in my opinion, is the very common light bluish gray, and this is what I used for pricing. The minifigure utensil bucket 1x1x1 handle scooter stand in light bluish gray, part 95344, is very expensive in light bluish gray, as it only came in one set. Change this to the more common dark bluish gray and you will save a ton, and these are the controls for the ball turrets. The Technic axle and pin connector toggle joint smooth, part 44, is very expensive in light bluish gray. These are the connections for the doors, and while they are somewhat visible, this element is very common in black. If you want to try a gray, try the old light gray to see if your results improve. For pricing purposes, I used black here. The minifigure hands in white and yellow, part 983, are effectively hidden. Any color will work fine here if you've got old torsos lying around. The parts list calls for 2 1x3 plates, part 3623, and 2 1x6 plates, part 3666 in light gray. I still have no idea where these go, and I would just change them to light bluish gray. The black hoses 14L part 75C14 can be any color. These form the core of the forward part of the missile launchers and are completely hidden. 2 of the 3 Technic plate 1x5 with smooth ends, 4 studs in center axle hole part 32124 in light gray are located at the very back of the troop bay, and you can barely see it. I have black ones and used those, but dark bluish gray is very common while light gray is not. The other is right up front for this detail in the front of the troop bay, and you can see I use black here as well. I recommend substituting all of these for dark bluish gray. The parts list calls for a number of different colors of the plate modified 1x1 with U-clip thin vertical grip part 4085B. These are used as a stud orientation change technique, yes it's illegal, in which you stuff the clip into the bottom of a brick. In my experience, the thin O-clip variant part 4085A is both easier to insert and less likely to break or warp. For cost purposes, the specified version, that's the thin U-clip, is generally better, but here I recommend setting the condition to used, whichever way you go, as sellers are charging very high prices for pieces listed as new. Same advice for the plate modified 1x1 with light attachment, thin ring, part 4081A in light gray and white. Make sure you're buying used pieces for both colors to save some money. The parts list calls for 1 Technic plate 1x4 with toothed ends, part 4263 in light gray. This can be replaced with the newer and somewhat common, but definitely less expensive, plate round 1x4 with 2 open studs, part 77845 in light bluish gray. And this piece is not very visible, but it's at the back of the troop bay. For the panel 1x2x2 part 4864B and the panel 1x4x3 part 4215B, both in white, make sure you don't get the newer version that has side supports. These are used in a specific way in the wings, and if the panels you get have side supports, your wings will not fit together correctly. Most Bricklink sellers will list the right part, but it doesn't hurt to confirm either in your order comments or via message before buying. The following list of elements may be beneficial to buy directly from LEGO's Pick-a-Brick service. Pick-a-Brick orders over $35 total qualify for free shipping, and if you spend more than $14 in the bestseller and standard categories, all the handling fees are waived. All of these elements are available in the United States as of late February, even after the Great Pick-a-Brick Purge of 2024, which thankfully is now over. Finally, I used the Brick Hunter extension to check the entire parts list against the Pick-a-Brick inventory. Check out my video on Brick Hunter if you haven't already or don't know how to use it, and you'll see in the conclusion how much I was able to save by ordering directly from LEGO. Thomas Jenkins Gunship instructions have 1,190 steps, with each part or subassembly added in each step outlined in red on a white background. This generally works fine for visibility. Each step has a manageable number of pieces, and this is a good thing given the complexity of the build. A lot of the pieces are also quite small, so this model took me upwards of 15 hours to build, and probably longer. I don't think it's a model you can sit down and finish in a day. Overall, the instructions are fairly easy to follow, and for a model of this size and complexity, they are very good. I did have some issues with viewing angles and sequencing, in addition to some minor things I think could be polished up, but most of the challenge of this model comes from the building techniques themselves. First, for the viewing angles, in step 217, it's somewhat difficult to tell where exactly this 2x3 plate connects to the Technic lift arms. Showing the other side would have been easier, or indicating in red which holes the studs go into. In steps 467 and 482, you can't see which way the stud on the modified brick is pointing. In both cases, it's facing to the rear of the assembly as shown. In step 504, the parts box shows a white Technic bushing, but I don't see where this goes in the model. Also, the starboard subassembly is depicted differently than the port side, and I'm not quite sure why. The subassembly box says X2. I don't think it makes a huge difference as the axle hole of the toggle joint should still line up, but the starboard side toggle joint as shown in the instructions is a floating piece and kind of annoying to build in this way. Steps 839 and 945 are the wing cannon connections. For these, you want to orient the Technic pin such that the slots on the pin go over the arch support. This is an awesome way to secure these assemblies, and I just think an explanatory note here would probably be helpful. In steps 1026 and 1066, either I am just missing something really obvious or my eyes are playing tricks on me, but I have no idea how these pins are supposed to be inserted based on the picture. But if you put them in the places where they actually fit, the assembly will work out just fine. In step 1082, the bar with clip is hidden from view. This is the analog to step 1042, and the clip attaches to the round 1x1 tile with bar and pin holder. For the stand, I found it very difficult to tell which of the yellow axles were 11L and which were 9L, as they are unfortunately not labeled. The 9Ls are on the ends and need to be across the interior lift arms to get the Technic pins inserted in step 23. For the upper part of the stand, I had similar difficulty discerning the 5L axles from the 6L axles. Again, the 5L axles are on the outer edges. Sequencing problems are those in which I felt that a certain step or subassembly would have been easier at a different point in the build. In step 7, I found it quite difficult to get the half pins inserted as shown, as the tolerance for getting the pins over the bars and into the holes was very small. It's easier to insert the pins first and then connect that lift arm to the rest of the assembly. When building the cargo net, the instructions have you constructing the little support assembly first, which is immediately followed by instructions on folding the net. It would have been better to build the subassembly in step 502 without showing the connection to the rest of the ship, and then having the instructions for folding the net around it. Otherwise, you end up connecting the support structure, and then you have to disconnect it to put the net on. In step 812 and 919, it's very difficult to get this 1x2 round plate in place due to the triangular section behind it. This connection is difficult to manage all around, and not only is it very angle dependent, it's also challenging to get the trailing edge of the wing to connect without popping the round plate off the bottom to begin with. At the very least, you could put this round plate in place in steps 806 and 913 in conjunction with the 1x2 modified plate with hole. In step 1106, the 3L Technic lift arms are shown connected, but you need to remove these in the next step to get the hoses in place. In step 1109, it has you inserting the Technic ball for the rear cannon. This requires a ton of force to connect, and the connections on this gray and white section are not particularly robust. I'm pretty sure it's impossible to get this on at this stage in the build without breaking things, so I recommend putting the Technic ball in place all the way back in step 384. It's also a little difficult to get this rear section back in place if it breaks trying to get the ball in. A few minor things before I get into some of the actual connections the instructions are asking you to make. In step 362, the note says to consider replacing the brick modified 1x1 with stud on one side from steps 363 and 365 with a headlight brick and 1x1 plate, as the 3L bar is slightly too short to bridge the gap. On mine, this wasn't merely slightly too short, it was definitely too short, so I recommend making this substitution. This does mean that the bottom edges of the vents are just off a little bit instead of flush with the sides. In step 682, the arrow for the subassembly is pointing at the wrong location. The bracket and the round plate with hole goes here. Building the ball turrets, the parts list calls for 6 24L 3mm hoses, but you're using 20L hoses and one 18L hose for each turret. There's no guide for cutting the 24L hoses, which I think is helpful, so here are the lengths that you'll need. And now for 3 sections of the build that I have a lot of difficulty with. The first is in step 643. The top section of the fuselage is pretty difficult to get in place. The 2 halves of this assembly are joined with an illegal connection that isn't very sturdy, and even after getting it in place you can see there's a little separation along the seam. The note in step 661 says that you might have an easier time attaching the 2 sides and wiggling the center into place, and this is ultimately what I ended up doing. Connecting that trailing edge of the wings in step 868 and 971 is challenging because of that black 1x2 round plate. I had to do some combination of removing the triangular sections behind it and trying to brace the black 1x2 round plate underneath it through various methods. I'm not gonna lie, this was kind of annoying. I finally resorted to joining the plate modified 1x2 with pinhole on top to the black 1x2 plate, and then attaching the rest of the subassembly as specified. This lets you secure the connection without moving all this other stuff out of the way, and it's easier to provide pressure in the horizontal direction instead of in the vertical direction. Finally, the missile launcher assembly instructions in step 1022 are pretty straightforward, but it did take me some practice and trial and error to figure out the best method for attaching the last tile and the last 2 oars. I uploaded this as a short, and you can check it out at the link if you can't see it very well here. In the interest of time, I'm going to show you a few places where I added pieces or built a section differently in a separate video. This will be linked in the description and up in the corner here. Closing thoughts on the build experience. Due to the complexity of this model, I only recommend tackling this if you are an experienced builder with a couple of custom models under your belt already. Even with experience, this model does require patience and some stamina. This gunship does have some play features, but this is definitely a display model. I don't recommend handling this any more than you need to. In order to get minifigures in the cockpit, gunner station, and ball turrets, you essentially have to build them in, and getting them out will take some disassembly that is at best uncomfortable for the gunner and the pilot, and what I would call more trouble than it's worth for the ball turrets. Basically, if you want to display this with their minifigures in the proper places, be prepared to have those in there for quite a while. It's a little difficult to see, but the seats inside the ball turrets are held in place with friction alone. Essentially, the width of the seat assembly fits perfectly in the little gap between the hinge connections of each hemisphere, so the slightest movement can knock them out of alignment and you cannot easily fix it. The front cannons and the rear cannon are somewhat posable. I find this little section comes off all the time as it only is held down by a hollow stud, and occasionally the front cannons will come off as well. This is actually kind of a good thing, as if you bump the cannons, they're more likely to pop off rather than transferring that force to something more critical, so I'm choosing to portray this as a feature and not a bug. Coming back to the doors, they do move like I showed earlier, but again I find this to be more trouble than it's worth. I have noticed, again, some separation of the Technic joints from their pivot points when I move them, and there's just a lot of delicate stuff around here, and that it's all kind of non-trivial to rebuild if something gets knocked loose. So I would just put the doors in the place where you want them and leave them there. The doors are also fairly fragile themselves, as the large portions of the angled section are only connected with ingot pieces. To make this a little sturdier, you can replace them with plates. But on multiple occasions when I've been manipulating the doors, the ingot pieces separate and you have to do a little bit of reconstruction. It's not too bad, but it's still a little bit annoying. I was pleasantly surprised at the sturdiness of the missile launchers, especially after that somewhat complicated assembly for this section. It's one of those sub-assemblies that's tricky to assemble, but once everything is in place, it's actually reasonably solid, especially if you use my very simple modification, which I will show in the other video. Looking at the top of the fuselage, there is some separation down the middle here. This is due to how the section is constructed. It's not going to fall apart entirely, however, as there's nothing really loose in the fuselage. This little section just under the Republic insignia can be a little tricky. It's kind of tough to line this panel on the top here up against the fuselage such that there's a minimal gap, and if you try and rotate this assembly to close it, all sorts of things can pop loose, including the connection method for the ball turret arms, which is just behind this section here. These are also not trivial to resecure in my experience, so proceed with caution when trying to move these around too much. These small sub-assemblies under the wings come off all the time. The angle of the wing makes the connection point quite tenuous. And finally, during the build process, I did have some instances in which the sub-assemblies that create the angled shape of the gunship's footprint came a bit loose. These side assemblies angle in and get secured in steps 100 and 101 just behind the side panels. They are under a small but noticeable amount of tension away from the center of the gunship. Since the connection is only 3 hollow studs, there isn't much clutch here. I didn't make any modifications to this connection in the end, but if you have problems with this, you could augment it with some solid studs like a 1x2 plate and a 2x2 corner piece instead of the 1x2 curved slope. You'll definitely know if you're having issues well before it comes time to cover this up and it becomes less accessible. As discussed earlier, I don't recommend skipping the stand. Not only does it look nice and gives the gunship a good amount of clearance, it also serves as a convenient way to handle the model without lifting the entire thing off the stand. You can lift the gunship off it, of course. It's kind of a two-handed affair, supporting the back like this. In theory, you could swish it around off the stand, but I think it's easier to just leave it on and then use the rear lift arms as a kind of a handle. You're going to want to be careful swishing it around no matter what, though. It's quite a heavy model, and if this thing gets away from you, there's no saving it gracefully, unfortunately. This gunship is not one you're going to want to handle too much when you're done with it. The issue isn't that it isn't sturdy, but if something breaks, it's probably not going to be easy to rebuild. As such, it's definitely a display model, and it serves that purpose extremely well. Thomas Jenkins Republic Gunship is, in the end, a LEGO masterpiece. Every shape, detail, and connection has clearly been thought out to levels you probably didn't even know existed. I certainly didn't, and this was an incredible model for novelty of connections, interesting parts usage, and of course, the end result. Getting there, though, is quite the adventure. I can't stress enough that this model is not for beginners, and this is the most technically challenging model I've built to date. In addition, it's not a model you can breeze right through. The instructions, while generally clear, demand close attention or something likely will not work. As you might expect, with over 3,000 pieces, this does come at a price. Without any substitutions in mid-February 2024, like I said in the introduction, the parts for this model would have come from 9 Bricklink stores with a total price of about $403 without shipping and tax, or roughly $485, and that's figuring 7% sales tax and $6 shipping and handling per order. With my substitutions, the cost decreases to 9 stores and $345 without shipping and tax, or about $414 with shipping and tax. Buying the elements I recommend off Pick-a-Brick, my Pick-a-Brick total was $57, which includes tax but no shipping and handling because I'm at the minimums. The elements from Bricklink would come from 9 stores and $260 without shipping and tax, or about $323 with shipping and tax, for a total of $380. Going full Pick-a-Brick, and I ran these numbers right after the elements that disappeared in the Great Pick-a-Brick Purge of 2024 returned. My Pick-a-Brick total was $313, again including tax but no shipping and handling. And the elements left over from Bricklink, there were 40 of them. I was able to get those from 6 stores for $36 without shipping and tax, or about $75 with shipping and tax, for a total of $388. I think there's a lot of potential for additional cost savings by buying more elements from Pick-a-Brick. However, the nice thing about getting new elements, especially for models with a lot of white, is that you don't need to worry as much about discolored used pieces. With a little tweaking, you could probably get this to between $360 and $370 total. While this might sound like a lot, I was actually pleasantly surprised at the final price and was expecting it to be well over $400 even with Pick-a-Brick. Instructions for this model cost $24.99 and are available on Rebrickable. There will be a link to where you can buy those in the description below. Thanks as always for watching my review of Thomas Jenkins Republic Gunship. If you built the model, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave your thoughts below in the comments. Remember to leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. Each subscription, comment, and like helps increase the channel's visibility, and I greatly appreciate your support. If you're in the middle of building this model, check out my video for the modifications that I made. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you back next time.